Do you think your life is tough? Try surviving just one day in the Middle Ages. No internet, no clean water, no safe food. And that's if you were lucky. In this video, we're diving into how regular folks lived, what they ate, and how they handled something as basic as going to the bathroom. Fair warning, some of what you're about to hear might turn your stomach. Welcome to The Middle Ages Unfiltered. The truth about medieval food. Forget the Hollywood banquets, the castle feasts, and the giant turkey legs. That was the rare luxury of nobles, and only on special occasions. For the overwhelming majority of people, peasants, laborers, and craftsmen, daily meals were dull, insufficient, and sometimes downright dangerous. Their main dish, a stew called pottage. It was a watery soup made with whatever they could find. Turnips, cabbage, lentils, barley, all simmered together in one pot for days on end. It was more of a murky mush, reheated over and over, tasting of dirt. And if you were unlucky, with a few bugs or larvae tossed in. Bread was the real staple, but don't picture soft, fluffy loaves. Medieval bread was thick, dark, and ground with stones, meaning it often contained tiny rock particles. Yes, people literally chewed stones every day. It wore down their teeth but toughened them up, until they fell out. And here's the worst part. Much of the bread was contaminated with a fungus called ergot, which grew on rye. Ergot could cause hallucinations, seizures, burning sensations, and in serious cases, death. Some historians even believe that mass poisonings from ergot may have sparked collective hysteria and even witch hunts. So the next time you hear about medieval witches, maybe it was just some really bad bread. Meat? A luxury item. And when people got their hands on it, it was often already spoiled. Without refrigerators, the only ways to preserve meat were salting or spicing it up, if you could afford those. Otherwise, you held your nose and ate what you could. Fish was another option, especially near the coast. But for those living far from the sea, fish arrived dried, overly salted, or just rotten. Eating it was more about surviving than enjoying. Drinking in the Dark Ages. So after all that, maybe you're thinking of reaching for a glass of water. But back then? Bad idea. In the Middle Ages, drinking water could be downright deadly. Rivers and wells were full of human and animal waste. That's why everyone, even kids, drank beer or ale. It wasn't as strong as today's beer, but it was fermented just enough to kill bacteria. The average peasant drank up to 8 pints of ale a day. That's about 4 liters. And children started as young as 5. Can you imagine a whole society where alcohol was safer than water? Bathroom business, a medieval nightmare. Now let's talk about another charming part of medieval life, using the bathroom. Most homes had a chamber pot, basically a bucket kept under the bed. And what did you do when it was full? You dumped it out the window. Yes, really. In cities like London or Paris, people would yell, "Gardez-l'eau," from the French "gardez l'eau," meaning watch out for the water. But it wasn't water. It was everything else. In castles, things weren't much better. They used garderobes, toilet rooms built into the castle walls where waste dropped through a hole straight down the side of the wall or into a moat. Some drops were more than 60 feet high. For emergencies, there were public latrines, basically holes built over rivers. The smell was so awful that workers called gong farmers, who were paid to clean out cesspits, weren't even allowed into public areas because of the stench that clung to them. Still, they made good money, up to 4 times more than a regular laborer. Oh, and toilet paper? Nowhere to be found. People used leaves, moss, cloth scraps, or their left hand. Nobles had linen or wool. The Romans had invented sponge sticks cleaned with vinegar, but that knowledge was lost for centuries. The brutal work life of the Middle Ages. Tired of your modern job? Feel like your boss doesn't appreciate you? Trust me, it could be so much worse. Much, much worse. In the Middle Ages, work wasn't just hard. It was brutal, dangerous and often deadly. No unions, no vacations, no workplace safety. Let's dive into the world of medieval labor, where even kids had to work before they could read. Get ready to discover the most extreme jobs of an era where just staying alive was your only promotion. The life of a medieval peasant. More than 9 out of 10 people in medieval Europe were peasants, folks who worked land they didn't even own. Their days started at sunrise and ended at sundown, no matter the season, the weather, or how sick they felt. They grew wheat, barley, oats, turnips, and cabbage. They used wooden tools pulled by oxen to plow the fields. Seeds were planted by hand, harvested with simple sickles, and everything was hauled around in wooden carts. During harvest season, it wasn't unusual to work 16 hours a day. And here's the kicker: they didn't get paid. Most peasants owed rent to a lord, either through hard labor, a portion of their harvest, or both. If you couldn't meet your obligations, you might be punished, or worse, thrown off the land. And back then, that often meant starving. The average farm worker burned more than 4,000 calories a day, but without a balanced diet, they aged fast. By 30, many had bodies worn down by constant labor. Apprenticeships and craft trades. Didn't want to be a farmer? Then your other option was to become an apprentice. Starting around the age of 7, children were sent to live and work with a master craftsman. Blacksmiths, carpenters, bakers, leather workers, and so on. As an apprentice, you didn't earn a wage. In exchange for food and shelter, you worked 6 or even 7 days a week for up to 14 years. After that, you became a journeyman, and only then could you try to become a master if you had the money. Blacksmiths worked in smoky forges, breathing in toxic fumes and risking serious burns every day. Leather workers, known as tanners, handled raw hides using chemicals like quicklime and even human urine. Their hands would burn, their skin would break out, and the smell? So bad that most people avoided them in public. Millers, who you might think had an easy job, were actually viewed with suspicion. Since they controlled grain grinding, many were accused of stealing or cheating the scales. In some places, that could get you maimed or worse. Desperate jobs for the destitute. If you were an orphan, disabled, or extremely poor, there were still a few jobs left, but they were the dirtiest, lowest paying, and most dangerous of all. Link boys. Young boys who carried torches at night to guide the wealthy through dark streets. Poorly paid and constantly at risk from violent attacks and accidents. Pure finders. People who collected dog poop from the streets to sell to leather workers. Yes, there was actually a market for that. Gong farmers. The brave and smelly. Souls who emptied cesspits and outhouses in cities. They only worked at night and were forced to live outside town walls. But surprisingly, they made good money, up to 4 times what a farm laborer earned. Even so, most wages were pitiful. A day laborer might earn 1 or 2 pennies a day, barely enough for bread and a bit of ale. Days off didn't exist. Work went on endlessly. Exhaustion wasn't rare. It was just life. No health care, no breaks, no rights. The idea of workplace health and safety didn't exist. Breathing in dust, smoke, or chemicals was just part of the job. No gloves, no goggles, no protective gear. If you got injured, the wound usually got infected. No antibiotics, no real medicine, just prayers. Women worked just as hard. They cooked, harvested, raised children, spun wool, ground grain, often all at the same time. Many worked through pregnancy and returned to the fields just days after giving birth. And if you couldn't work, there were no pensions, no disability support, no safety net. Most people ended up begging on the street. Even that was regulated. Some cities had a limit on how many beggars were allowed or required a special license to ask for help. Medicine in the Middle Ages, more harm than healing. Got a cold today? You'd probably rest, take some medicine, maybe visit a doctor. But in the Middle Ages, even a mild illness could turn deadly. Why? because medicine back then wasn't based on science. It was a strange mix of superstition, astrology, and pain. Believe it or not, seeing a doctor could actually speed up your death. Getting sick was a death sentence. Medieval medicine was built on old ideas from ancient Greece, especially the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. People believed that getting sick meant these fluids were out of balance. Have a fever? They thought you had too much blood. The cure? Bloodletting. Doctors would cut open a vein and let your blood drain out. Sometimes they used sharp knives. Other times they used leeches. Dozens of them, placed all over your body to balance your system. One medical text even suggested using up to 70 leeches for certain treatments. No anesthesia, no sterilization, just pain, infection, and often death. Cures. That could kill you. The medicines they used? Terrifying. Many included ingredients that today we consider poison: mercury, lead, human urine, dried dung, even parts of dead animals. These were applied to wounds, sniffed or swallowed. Take mercury, for example. It was used to treat venereal diseases. Yes, a deadly toxin was the go-to treatment. Side effects: tooth loss, madness, and yes, again, death. There were no antibiotics, no vaccines, and no knowledge of bacteria. Germs? Never heard of them. People thought disease came from bad air or from being punished by God. So during outbreaks, the solutions were things like praying, blaming witches, or burning incense. Epidemics and mass death. Diseases swept through towns like wildfires. The worst of all? The Black Death. Between the year 1347 and 1351, the bubonic plague killed half the population of Europe. Half. They didn't know how it spread, so they tried all sorts of bizarre things. Stuffing flowers into their clothes to block the smell, fleeing the cities, even whipping themselves in public processions to beg for forgiveness. Bathing was often banned because people thought it opened up your pores to bad air. The result? More skin infections, more lice, more sickness, a never-ending cycle of misery. And the doctors, often called barber surgeons, they also did tooth extractions, amputations, and cauterizations, all without painkillers. Their tools: knives, saws, tongs, and red-hot irons. Birth and death, equally dangerous. Giving birth in the Middle Ages was incredibly risky. Many women and babies didn't survive. Midwives did their best, but without clean tools or any real medical knowledge, childbirth was full of danger. C-sections? Rare and almost always fatal for the mother. Common causes of death included infection, bleeding, and postpartum fever. Being pregnant was like playing a deadly lottery, and even if you were born healthy, the odds weren't great. Only about 30 out of every 100 children made it to their 5th birthday. Childhood diseases, poor nutrition, and lack of hygiene took a huge toll. People didn't live long. Most didn't make it past 30 or 40. And if they did, they were often toothless, in pain, and barely able to move. The forgotten and the feared. Mental illness was not understood at all. People believed that anyone acting strangely was possessed by demons. The treatments? Exorcisms, prison, or execution. Conditions like epilepsy, schizophrenia, or depression were feared, not treated. People with leprosy were pushed out of society and forced to live in leper colonies. They had to ring bells to signal their presence, and were often attacked just for being sick. The dark side of medieval justice and warfare. Think the justice system today is slow or unfair? You'd still take it any day over what passed for justice in the Middle Ages. Trials weren't about finding the truth, they were about punishment. This final part of our journey shows the harshest side of medieval life. Cruel laws, terrifying punishments, and a constant shadow of war. Forget the fairy tale knights and noble quests. What we really had were survivors, trying to make it through a world that punished without mercy. Justice for whom? And how? The medieval legal system was a mess. There were no unified laws. What was legal in one village might be illegal in the next. And since most people couldn't read, they had no idea what the laws were. Until they broke one. Innocent until proven guilty? Not a thing. Just being accused often meant you were doomed. Trials weren't about facts. They were about divine judgment. To prove your innocence, you might face a trial by ordeal. Sound dramatic? It was. Here are a couple of real examples. Trial by hot iron. You had to carry a red-hot metal bar for about 10 feet. If your burns didn't get infected in 3 days, you were innocent. Trial by water. You were tied up and thrown into a river. If you sank, you were innocent, but possibly drowned. If you floated, guilty. Basically, there was no winning. Punishments that would be war crimes today. More than 200 crimes, like stealing firewood or a chicken, could lead to the death penalty. And dying wasn't always the worst part. Punishment had to make a statement. Hanging, considered the mildest form of execution. Beheading, a privilege reserved for nobles. Drawing and quartering, used for traitors. The victim was dragged by horses, hanged almost to death, then disemboweled alive, beheaded, and cut into 4 pieces. The parts were displayed in public as a warning. Torture wasn't rare, it was routine. It was used to force confessions, whether they were true or not. Devices included the rack, stretched your body until joints dislocated. The Iron Maiden, a metal chamber filled with spikes. Thumb screws, crushed your fingers slowly until the bones shattered. Even if you confessed, the execution usually came anyway. Public shaming as entertainment. Not all punishments ended in death. Some were designed to humiliate. The stocks, wooden blocks that held your hands and head. People would throw garbage, or worse, at you. The pillory, similar but often in busier places for more humiliation. The ducking stool, used mostly for women labeled as troublesome. You'd be dunked repeatedly in cold water until you passed out. These events weren't private. They were public spectacles. People brought food and drinks like it was a festival. Executions and torture became the closest thing to medieval TV. War without honor. Medieval wars weren't short, noble battles. They were long, pointless, and brutal for ordinary people. Just look at the 100 Years' War between England and France. Sounds like a century, right? It actually lasted 116 years. Entire towns were burned, crops destroyed, and civilians slaughtered by both sides. Most soldiers weren't trained professionals. They were farmers armed with spears, axes, or farm tools. Only rich knights could afford full armor, and that cost as much as 2 or 3 years of a skilled craftsman's wages. The most feared weapon? Not the sword, but the English longbow. It could pierce armor and was used by archers who trained from childhood. Their skeletons even show permanent damage from years of practice. Battles were carnage. In the Battle of Towton in 1461, 28,000 men died in just one day. That's about 1% of all men in England at the time. And the worst part wasn't the fighting. It was what came between battles. Armies lived off the land, which meant stealing food, killing animals, and burning villages. For civilians, living near a battlefield was often more dangerous than being a soldier. Sieges were nightmares. Towns were cut off for months, even years, with no food or water. People ate rats, cats, sometimes even each other. The siege of Paris in the late 800s drove many to desperation. The longest siege in history, the Siege of Candia, lasted 21 years. The everyday horror of medieval life. Even if you survived war, execution, or the plague, daily life was still a battle. Cities stank. Dead bodies, waste, and trash piled up. The Thames River in London was so polluted, people called it a reeking creature. Privacy? Non-existent. Whole families slept in one room, often in one bed. Travelers shared beds with strangers at inns. The idea of personal space just didn't exist. Entertainment was violent, dogfights, rat hunts, public punishments. And education? That was only for nobles or the clergy. Superstition ruled daily life. People believed in demons, goblins, evil eclipses, and miracle cures. 9 out of 10 people never left the village they were born in. Life was short, dirty, harsh, and often hopeless. So, is modern life really that bad? After this journey through the Middle Ages, here's a question for you. Do you still think your modern life is hard? You don't have to eat bread filled with hallucination-causing fungus. You don't have to drink beer because the water could kill you. You don't have to prove your innocence by being thrown in a river. And you definitely don't have to fight off an army with a shovel. We live in an age of comforts and rights that people back then couldn't even imagine. So next time you're stuck in traffic or waiting in a long line, just remember, it could be worse. You could be in the stocks getting hit with rotten tomatoes. Thanks for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, share, and let us know in the comments. Which part shocked you the most?